Welcome to the AICPA Town Hall Series, your resource for the latest news and updates on pressing issues facing the accounting profession.
Good afternoon and welcome to the AICPA Town Hall Series. I'm Eric Auskerson, one of your hosts for today. We've got a power hour in store for you. As many of you know, this is our 99th Town Hall. We've been at this for 3 years now, and we're really looking forward to getting to 100 with you in Vegas in a couple of weeks. But let's get into today's show. We've got a number of agenda topics. We're going to kick things off with our quarterly economic update with Steve Leisman, who's the senior economic reporter for CNBC. I'm sure many of you watch him daily on the Squawk Box. We're then going to have a DC and profession update. We're going to talk about what's going to be highlighted at the AICPA Governing Council meeting coming up later this month in Washington, D.C., and the top issues that we'll be bringing to the Capitol. We then are going to have a segment related to a new talent pipeline initiative. It's called the Experience, Learn, and Earn program. And then we've got Tom Hood joining us for his quarterly Future of Finance update. And then we'll be ending with our open forum and closing remarks. So we got a lot to cover. Here's the lineup of presenters, which we'll introduce as they join the show. So now it's my privilege to introduce you to Steve Leisman. Let's bring Steve Leisman on up. I definitely tune into Squawk Box almost daily. It's a great way to start the morning. And he is really the data guy there. He's the data guy. He's been interpreting the data for all of us in particular over these last couple of years. He's gonna talk a little bit about how that all works and maybe why some things haven't gone completely as planned related to the forecast. He's got a tremendous resume. So Steve, it's great to have you with us here with the town hall community.
Really good to be here. Thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to this discussion. Where do you want to start, Eric?
Yeah, well, as you and I were discussing, I mean, you've got a great set of slides you've put together. One thing we thought would be extremely helpful is for you to explain a little bit about, how we got to where we are right now
Sure.
with the rates in the economy, and then, give us your best insights on where you think things are going. So I think we've got a number of slides we're gonna bring up to help you, walk us through this discussion.
Okay, I'll walk through the slides in just a second here. Let me just tell you, first of all, I'm going to get to what maybe you want to hear, which is where I think things are going. But I wanted to spend a little time on kind of how we got here and how difficult it has been in this pandemic period or post-pandemic period to kind of forecast or even understand the economy. I think this is a really important thing to learn. And I've been kind of doing a lot of research on what makes things so weird, I guess is the best way to put it. But I will end up, and I'll give you a little preview of the story I'm going to write about for tomorrow. I'm going to talk about tomorrow morning, so you can get an idea a little bit about where things may be headed. But I just want to spend a minute. If you take a look at this, a slide here, which I put together this morning, but I kind of live it every Friday, which is the extent to which the economists or the consensus has been incapable of forecasting jobs, and this is kind of like a metaphor, I think, for their difficulty in forecasting the economy. So take a look here. The error on Friday morning at 8:30 of the consensus for the 6 years before the pandemic was 53,000 a month. During the pandemic, from February 20 to February 22, it ratcheted up to 787,000 a month. That is to say that, of course, this is absolute without regard to sign, plus or minus. And there's 3 big months that were missed. But even when I take that out, it's still like 300,000 is the difference if I take out those 3 big months they missed. And then you go and you look at the March 22, the last year or so period here, it's still elevated. So we're still having difficulty forecasting what's going on in the economy. And the reason I use jobs is because jobs has been one of the most perplexing things about the economy and the strength of the job market as the Fed has raised quite as much as it's been. This resilience in the job market has been a particularly perplexing aspect, and it's something that drives the Fed and policy. Now, I want to go to the next slide, and I'll show you one source of that uncertainty. Now, don't get yourself too involved with the detail of this. Just note until you get to about 2020 how stable the differences are. And I'll explain what these two lines are. The orange line is the contribution of GDP to inventory, so that when they raise inventories up, it adds to GDP. When they lower inventories, it subtracts from GDP. The same thing is true for what we call net trade. All you have to do to understand this chart is look at the huge volatility in the post-pandemic period. Now, look at that big red spike there. That is 6%. In fact, it's 6 percentage points. So in that particular quarter, the addition of inventories added 6% to inventory. What's happening here? This is the effect of the supply chain difficulties on the economy. So what's happened? The ports close, the ports open, the ports close, the ports open. They stock inventory, they're out of inventory. You can see that the volatility here in these two aspects, forget the idea of consumer spending or business spending, just these two factors here. I probably could have added them together without regard to sign and to give you some of the sense. This is what makes it very difficult. Why, when we look at the GDP chart, you have a lot of up and down on GDP, and it makes it very difficult to know where exactly we are on growth. And I don't say this as an excuse. I say this, if you get mad and you throw your coffee mug at the television, which you probably shouldn't do unless you want a new TV. This is what's happening, is that there's a lot more volatility in the economy, and especially from these two aspects than we've ever seen before. And it's made it very difficult to know. And it's one of the reasons why we keep having these calls for recession. And I think you know that the probabilities of recession, either in models at the New York Fed or in the surveys like we do with our CNBC Fed survey, are all north of 50%. Well, what I called this morning the recession, the Godot recession, we keep waiting for it. It keeps not coming. Move on to the next slide, and we'll talk a little bit about where we are in the job market. You can see there, my arrow got moved just a little bit. It should be just a little bit higher. That's okay. Bottom line is we're making really good progress in getting back to where we were in terms of the trajectory. We're already above the number, but in terms of that trajectory, we're still below where we should be. That helps explain some of the resilience in the job market, that if the economy continued to grow, but we lost a lot of workers, by the way, we lost some to death, among other things. We lost some to people who dropped out. When we look at the job market and who is in and who is out, we finally achieved the participation rate in the prime age workforce of 25 to 54. But what's not come back are the 55 and older, specifically 65 and older. And to get a little bit more into the weeds on this, what we're not seeing are people who dropped out in that age group and then came back. It's that return that's not happening. There's always some percentage, and in fact, there's a growing percentage, of course, with the aging of the baby boom generation of people who are retiring. That's expected. It was expected demographically. What's not happening is some folks will retire and they'll come back to the workforce. So that's a challenge. And by the way, it's a challenge for businesses that we're hearing them beginning to address, in the sense that they're understanding that they have to figure out how they're going to bring back some of these older workers, if indeed they want to fill those jobs that are out there. Moving on to the next slide. All right, now we're going to see, I'm going to try to build this case. How did we get to this place where we had this higher than expected inflation? Here are two fiscal impulses to the economy that you're looking at. And I'm just doing this by Treasury's outstanding. It's a proxy for government spending. And what you see there is about a $4 trillion impulse of spending during the Trump administration that came in. And what happened is, we thought, and we were kind of wrong about this, the economics profession that is, and the government, that what we were experiencing during the pandemic was a problem with aggregate demand. And fact is, people figured out how to spend, but they figured out how to spend in places where the goods weren't necessarily there. And that's going to lead to the inflation numbers we'll look at in a second. And then Biden came along and he had his, what do you want to call it, whack at the tree or sip at the, or sit down at the trough, whatever you want to call it. He did another $1.9 or $2 trillion. Those two fiscal impulses were part of the reason why there was a lot of money sloshing around in the economy. But there's a couple other reasons as well. And you'll see that in the next slide as we go through and look at the Fed funds rate. I have this up for two reasons. One is perspective and one is objective and another is subjective. So if you look, we're right above the 2 in 20 at the bottom of your chart there on the right-hand side. You can see that's the cut to zero. And it's actually a somewhat faster cut to zero than they did in the great financial crisis. If you look at the part, that downslope there just to the left of the 10 there, what you'll see is that they cut and then they cut again. Whereas this time around, they just whacked it right to zero right away. And you'll note where we are now. What you can't quite gauge from this chart is it is one of the fastest increases we've ever seen. And that's part of the problem that is probably down the road in terms of credit issues. When we talk about the banking sector, we haven't really had credit issues so far. What we've had essentially are liquidity issues relative to the movement of deposits. The credit issue, I think that's unfortunately in our future. And that comes in part from raising from zero and the speed and the difficulty of adjustment that certain people have had or certain businesses have had, but also the level. You can see we're quite above the level that we've had since 2005. So we're dealing with this in two regards. The good news, the reason I put this chart up is we are not yet, and I do not believe, headed to the levels we saw in 1980. So however bad you think it is right now, it's not as bad as it was back then. Hopefully that's some bit of solace that's out there. But part of the stimulus, put that together with the prior chart that showed the stimulus from the fiscal side. And remember, we did not get that fiscal stimulus in the great financial crisis. So the Fed cut to zero, but there was no fiscal impulse or very small fiscal impulse relative to GDP. This time you have both together. And then I'll show you one other aspect that I think will blow your mind because it kind of blew my mind. If you go to the next chart there, it's kind of mind-blowing. And I think this kind of looks like a planetary system, if you ask me. And what these are quantitative easing episodes there. There's QE1, which looks like a lot, or it felt like a lot back then when they did it, but it ended up, and it was a lot in a hurry. They put a lot of money into the system. Remember, they had never done it before. And then they went and they said, you know what? The economy's not really responding the way we want it to. Give me a second here. So we're going to do more. And that wasn't enough. And then they finally said, you know what? The only way for QE to work is to make it unlimited and do as much as we possibly can. And so they did QE3. And man, that seemed like a lot. But then go to your right there, ladies and gentlemen. And I give you, what would you call that? Jupiter relative to Venus, Mercury, and the Earth right there. I think that might be a good way to put it. So there's big old Jupiter right there. They did $120 billion a month into the system of buying treasuries and mortgages. Why did they do that? They cut to zero. They felt the economy needed more stimulus. So they bought bonds to drive down interest rates even further. And they bought bonds and they bought bonds and they bought bonds. And I could go on for a long time because they bought bonds for a very long time. In fact, they bought bonds for longer than they've even acknowledged they should have when they started to realize sometime in September of 2021 that this was not an aggregate demand problem. This was a problem of supply and supply shock. They continued to buy bonds until March. Now, I just want to show you a couple things here. So they got to around March or April or so, and you can see the balance sheet starts to come down. And then if you would mind focusing for a second on where that star is, you can see that that's where it ratcheted back up. Why did it ratchet back up? Because two big bank failed, and they had to shove some more money into the system through lending to banks through the discount window and through the new program they created, which took the assets of banks and loaned to them at par. So that ratcheted back up the balance sheet. And if you look just to the right of that, it slowly started to come back down. And one of the things we'll talk about in just a couple minutes here is the idea of whether or not we're kind of through that problem of the banking issues or not. And just a couple more slides here, which I'll run through. All of that leads, you can see here, what you see to the where it's down below the 2% or 2 and a little bit target there, that's the line that I drew across it. That's the Fed's target. Note that it's a little bit higher for CPI because the Fed uses the PCE. So I put the blue line a little bit higher, maybe 2.5%, maybe 2.25%. It depends. But what you see to the what extends to the left there is a very long period of time of 2% inflation. That had led the Fed to believe that, hey, we can shove a lot of money into the system. Remember, you had those 3 QEs I showed you earlier, and inflation didn't really react. Well, You got the two fiscal stimuluses I showed you, and not much real, what would you call it, fiscal rectitude on the part of the Biden administration. And then you have this inflation. Note that the inflation begins just about when Biden takes office. So I think we can blame both administrations in somewhat equal proportion for the inflation that we have here now. And then you can see it's starting to come down, but watch the red line there. That's the one you want to pay attention to. That is core PCE, core CPI minus food and energy. Watch that it is now kind of flat, and that's troubling to the Federal Reserve. Several comments today from Fed officials. Inflation is not falling fast enough. And I don't know if that's the last slide or maybe there's one more after that. Oh, yeah, there's GDP. You can see we had those two negative quarters there. The reason I wanted to do the first slides I did and show you that trade and export stuff is those two quarters, which everybody says, hey, was that a recession? It wasn't probably a recession. I doubt it'll be called one when the National Bureau of Economic Research meets to say that it was a recession, because that decline there was almost entirely inventories and trade. Consumer spending and business spending actually was pretty healthy in those quarters. The jobs numbers I've showed you have been healthy. Unlikely the NBER thinks that's a recession in those two quarters. But note that it has begun to really slow. I left on this chart the 2 quarters around the pandemic, which throws every single chart I have out of whack from a Y scale perspective. It really screws them up. You really don't get any sense of dimension of everything to the right of it, but you can see that it's begun to slow, and that has been slowing of business spending and slowing of consumer spending, and those are the things we're watching. Okay, let's get to the Fed funds, and right now. Where are we right now? Currently, the Fed did raise to 5 1/8. That's its projection for the year. I want to talk about that 5.15 in July in a minute because it is kind of interesting. But let's talk about the January 24 number. This has been something that has been fascinating and interesting the whole time. And what that is showing you is that while the Fed is projecting a year-end rate of 5 1/8, the market itself is continuing to forecast that the Federal Reserve will cut. A little less disagreement. The Fed is on board with cuts next year on that June 24 thing. The market's a little more aggressive there. So the question is, how much of a reckoning is there going to be? How does that reckoning manifest itself in terms of interest rates and the market? So we've seen this gap close, by the way, in February. I believe it was February of this year when the market all of a sudden got the Fed's religion and decided that the Fed was really going to be going higher. And then Silicon Valley Bank came along, and the market decided that no, the Fed is not going to be as aggressive as it thinks. Whereas the Fed, and this is where I'm going to talk about the story tomorrow, because we've had 3 Fed speakers today that kind of said, you know what, this pause, and I want to get a quote. I'm just going to give me a second to look at my computer here, kind of like I do on air all day.
Yeah, when you pull that quote up, and guys, you can drop the slides here because I've got some Q&A that I'm going to.
Yeah, I'll get to that in a second. Okay, so the market now is trading with a 68% probability. Oh, you're looking at my screen there. That's cool. I didn't know you were going to get that. That's right here. You can't really see it. A 68% probability of a rate of the rate being unchanged in the June meeting, and a 31% probability of a rate hike. And again, if you can just barely see that next line there, 30% probability of the same rate hike in July. So bottom line is, you can take down the slides if you don't mind there, that there might be a reckoning, and this is what I'm going to talk about tomorrow. We thought we had a few months until the market and the Fed kind of had to either figure out what was going on. Either the Fed came to the market and cut, or the market came to the Fed and started to price in higher rates. But this may be happening in June, because we now have Bullard said today that the Fed he would consider another rate hike. Lori Logan, not a dyed-in-the-wool hawk by any means, saying the data is not right for a rate hike. And even Phil Jefferson, the man who, the Fed governor who Powell has now nominated to be the vice chair, he sounded like he could go either way today in his speech. And we've got Powell talking tomorrow, so stay tuned.
Well, you've been busy this week. I mean, you were with the Atlanta Fed at the earlier part of the week. I know you were with a lot of bankers yesterday. So there's a lot of debate here, and you had Paul Tudor Jones on earlier this week on Squawk Box. Some people, him saying, we're done, we've gone too far. And then you've got, plenty saying no more rate cuts in 2023. So right now it sounds, and first off, I just want to thank you for that how and why. I mean, that segment for the town hall, you will be able to get that in archive because you probably want to watch that again. There was a lot of information, and that was a really well done analysis. So thanks for putting that all together for us. But where are you at? You've got some people saying they've gone too far. You've got the Fed saying we're not cutting rates in 2023. Is it really just 50-50 right now? Is that how you see it?
I do see it more 50-50, in part because I think the market is overstating or is a little bit too exuberant, I guess is a way to put it, in its outlook for the Fed to cut rates. What I didn't mention, and I should have, I'm sorry about that, is the idea of the Fed doing more has gone hand in hand with these comments that they really believe as if the issues with banking are both contained and not likely to get worse. I believe it was, I can't remember if it was Logan or Bullard today who said that their sense is that the whole issue with banking, it was Bullard who said banking is overstated as to the impact on the economy. And if I could show another graph, I don't think I can do it now. What I would show you is the whole reset in the outlook for the Fed, getting back to believing in the rate cuts, is something that happens around March 7th, and it never came back. So somebody has to reset here and refocus the idea if indeed these banking issues are behind us. That said, I am not convinced the credit issues are behind us. Mm-hmm. The first issue is a deposit issue. It's those deposits fleeing, creating a need for liquidity on the part of banks that they're not ready for, and that creates instability and has really toppled 3 banks, leading to the 2 biggest bank failures in U.S. history, or 2 of the 3 biggest bank failures in U.S. history. That is separate from the issue of what happens to the commercial real estate loans and other potential credit issues that may be out there in the economy to come. I think that's more of a 2024 story than it might be this year if I look at the total amount of rollover that happens.
Well, Steve, we could go on with you for another 20 minutes, but we've got a number of other segments that are going to be coming up. I do have a closing question for you. So, and I look forward to having you on future town halls as well. So thanks for today's session. If you know these firms, there's thousands of firms on the town hall with us today. They're advising their small business clients. So right now, it looks like we're close to the top of the Fed rate hikes could be done, but it's the credit. What would you advise? How would you advise your small business clients right now related to credit decisions or related to just business strategy?
Maybe a short anecdote from a CNBC exchange I had would be helpful in this regard. And it's a little bit skirting your answer, but not necessarily. So there was a day that Jim Bullard came on and he showed a graph of the Taylor rule, which is used to kind of forecast and project and kind of backtest where the Fed is. And he showed a range of 5 to 7%. And one of the people on the panel said he thought it was irresponsible for Bullard to show that 7% number. And I said, you know what? I think it's irresponsible if you're an investment advisor not to think that the Fed could go to 7% and not to put that in as a case, not a base case necessarily, but something that could happen. That was several months ago. I think now the potential top that you ought to be thinking about is somewhere in a 6.25% to 6.5% as the worst case scenario for the Federal Reserve, which is a percentage point higher, which is to say, I'm not sure we're done yet. The Fed is going to fight this thing until it's done and until they've defeated inflation. And it's very instructive what I asked President Bostic from the Atlanta Fed on Monday, where I said, will you stop hiking or will you cut if there's a recession? And he said, if inflation is still high, I won't be cutting. So I think it's prudent to think about a more hawkish Fed, a tighter Fed, with the caveat being they will ultimately adjust if the banking issues get worse. And I can't forecast that. And I know the Fed can't forecast that. I also think it's fair to think about a certain resilience in this economy that has been unexpected. A 3.4% unemployment rate, if it rises by a percentage point, will still be very low. So incomes are still going to be decent. There's still savings out there. So I would think about a tighter Fed and a more resilient economy than perhaps is out there in the conventional wisdom.
Well, thank you. Thanks for that summary. These aren't easy questions and not easy answers, but you did a great job of kind of sharing a lot of knowledge with us. So again, look forward to having you on a future town hall. Thanks for being with us today.
My pleasure. And I'm sorry if that was too fast. Maybe you can run it back in slow motion when people go, and I'll slow down next time.
That's, hey, we both live here in New York, so sometimes it's fast, right?
Right,
So, all
exactly.
right. See you, Steve. Thank you.
Okay, take care.
Let's now move on to our next segment here, Rachel. And we're pretty much still we got time here for all of these next segments, Lisa. So we'll move through it. We might take a little bit of time out of open forum at the end. So Rachel, great to have you with us here. Why don't we just kick things off real quickly before we get into your couple of slides and share a little bit about. We didn't get into it with Steve about the current debt limit negotiations. Where do they stand? Likelihood of some type of compromise, and you've got Yellen's reiterated June 1st deadline looming out there.
Yeah, so the biggest issue right now in DC continues to be the debt limit. As you said, June 1 appears to be the date that we could start to default. So negotiations are ongoing. The president invited the speaker and the majority and minority leader of the Senate and the minority leader of the House to the White House on Tuesday, and they had a meeting earlier this week. It appeared that the discussions weren't going quite as well, but as we sit today, it sounds like they're making some progress on the negotiations. The speaker announced earlier today that they could actually even have a vote on raising the debt limit sometime next week. They've narrowed down those who are negotiating to just a few, which appears to be helpful in trying to make some progress here. We've talked about before that the House passed a bill, it was the House Republican bill that would raise the debt ceiling to March of next year, or by $1.5 trillion, whichever one would come first. And it also included a number of other issues like canceling student loan forgiveness or clawing back some of the $80 billion from the IRS that was appropriated in the Inflation Reduction Act, and other issues like spending cuts, permitting reforms, and repealing unobligated COVID funds. Not all of that is going to be in a final bill. It's going to be some sort of compromise. It's going to be a compromise between what the House Republicans passed, as well as a compromise from the Democrats, who have wanted a clean bill without any preconditions. So right now, talks are ongoing. It sounds like we could have a vote soon. The House and Senate are only in session for a handful of days before June 1, so the pressure's really on. But the good news is that everyone is saying that we won't default, but the question is, what the eventual bill will look like.
Yes, so somehow they will get something done. There'll be a lot of drama in the process. So it's a big week coming up for the AICPA Governing Council. 300 plus representatives will be down there and talking with the AICPA leadership, as well as going to the Hill. Here's the slate of key items that they're going to be taking up to the Hill.
Yeah, absolutely. So they're meeting here in DC. So they're taking the opportunity of being here in the nation's capital to meet with their elected representatives in the House and Senate. The issues that they're going to be discussing are issues that we've all talked about on this town hall before. The fiscal state of the nation resolution. It's really, timely for them to be having these conversations. This resolution is the one in which the Comptroller General would give an annual report to Congress on the audited financial statements of the U.S. government, which would help them to make decisions as they consider other legislation. The accounting in STEM bill is the issue in which it would allow for K through 12 STEM grants to be used for accounting. So it would allow students at a younger age, beginning as early as kindergarten, to start to become more familiar with accounting and to hopefully gain an interest in it and learn about all the different opportunities there are should they pursue a degree in accounting. The filing extension safe harbor issue is one that Barry first announced here on the town hall a few weeks ago, and that has to do with a safe harbor when filing an extension, that an individual could just pay 125% of their prior year's tax when filing that extension, so they don't have to do the calculations twice. One, when they file the extension, and then again in October. This would just make it a lot easier for them just by paying that 125%. And then the last issue has to do with 529 accounts and the ability to use those accounts to pay for fees and expenses to maintain a post-secondary credential, and think about being able to use those accounts for things like the CPA exam and fees related to that. So those are the 4 issues that they'll be talking to their senators and representatives about.
Well, Lisa, I know, and these are other hot items that the AICPA advocacy team's been working on. Lisa, I know you're close to many of these, so maybe comments from you and maybe some final comments from Rachel.
Yeah, we've already gotten a question about what's going on with Section 174. So as Rachel and Barry and others have talked about in the past, it's looking for a vehicle that will allow it to, and an extension of the ability to immediately deduct those expenses versus amortizing them. So we're still waiting to find a tax vehicle that can move that forward. We continue to support that bill, and it'll be, as the headline says here, it's one of our top tax advocacy items, as well as pushing for a common sense approach to 1099Ks, so that the IRS isn't flooded with 1099Ks for $600 in transactions, as opposed to the current 20,200 transactions. So a lot of good, strong advocacy work continuing to go on. Rachel, anything you want to add? I can talk about the IRS free filing system, but I want to make sure there was nothing else to add.
Yeah, no, we have sent in some letters on the issues that you talked about, 1099K and Section 174. There have been bills that have been introduced on those issues. They have been introduced by members who sit on the committees of jurisdiction on the Senate Finance Committee and the Ways and Means Committee, which is helpful. But as you mentioned, it's really just finding a vehicle to get this language into law.
And
well,
Eric, there was a lot of, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Really quickly, let me talk about the free filing system that the IRS announced that they were going to pilot this year. That caused a lot of press, and so I just wanted to touch on it quickly. It is a pilot. It is far from a done deal. It is incredibly charged politically, so we don't know that it will go anywhere. We expect that the IRS will find out that it's expensive to maintain a filing system like this. They've got to build it, they've got to keep it up to date, and then they've got to provide customer support around it. We will be keeping our eye on it, but we don't expect that this is going to have an impact on a big impact on our members, because these would not be generally the clients that most of our members are serving. But it is a reminder that some of the compliance efforts will be automated, and there's opportunity to look for other ways to add on to your services, like financial planning.
Yeah, and I'll say it's right now it's just planning for the federal system. So I think most individuals would like to have a complete solution. So thank you, Rachel. We'll go right in. Lisa, I'll let you take us away for this next section.
Thank you. Julia Woisla is joining us. Julia is a senior manager on the AICPA's public accounting team. She's been heavily involved in efforts related to the CPA pipeline. So she did a lot of great work around CPA evolution, and has also been instrumental in developing the AICPA and NASBA's draft pipeline acceleration plan. On the last town hall, so May 4th, Sue Coffey joined me, and we went through a lot of the underlying root causes of the pain that we're feeling in our talent pipeline. and also talked a little bit about some of the risks to the profession if the pipeline isn't addressed appropriately. So if you missed that one, I would encourage you to please click on the link in the download slides to catch up on that, because it's a great look at the overall holistic landscape. But I asked Julia to join us today because the first item on this slide that you're seeing is the Experience, Learn, and Earn plan. So Julia, thank you. Welcome to your first town hall. And let's jump into the ELE program that we've got outlined on the next slide.
Great.
So yeah, let's start with the why. What problems were we trying to solve related to helping students get the 150 hours that they need for CPA licensure?
So as you mentioned, Lisa, I previously worked on our CPA Evolution initiative. And while we were working on that together with NASBA, we started to hear a lot of comments about the 150 credit hour requirement, and specifically the cost to obtain that, the financial cost and the opportunity cost of getting those extra 30 hours. And looking at how we could help students bridge those gaps, maybe students who need to start working right away after graduation, or who aren't sure of what path they want to take to get their 30 hours.
And there's also a misunderstanding around how you can get them and what the opportunities are in getting those. On the next slide, we show some of the guiding principles that I think are really important, and maybe you can just hit on those really quickly.
Absolutely. So our number one guiding principle for this program is that it's cost effective to the student. That was one of the big pieces of feedback we've heard, is the rising cost of higher education and how that affects people seeking the 150. So our number one goal is that this is cost effective for the student. And we've defined that as being about the same as the cost of community college in the US. We also want this to allow for up to 30 credit hours. I say up to 30 because we know not everyone needs a full 30 credit hours. So if you're somewhere in between, 120 and 150, maybe you only need 15 or 20 credit hours, you only pay for the credit hours you need. We want this to be scalable so that a firm of any size or any practice type could participate if they wanted to hire students into the program. And also importantly, that this would require minimal to no changes to state laws and rules. That really helps us preserve CPA mobility and helps us move this along faster than if we had to do extensive state regulatory changes.
That's a great point. And again, that's a good reminder. If you didn't catch the May 4th Town Hall, we go into some of the reasons why we want to make that impact minimal. That's fantastic. And so let's look at some of the benefits of the program that we've outlined as a draft. This is the pilot of the program. So what strikes you on here as being one of the most important benefits of the program?
I would really emphasize that flexibility component. Part of the great aspect of this is it will allow students in the firm they're working with to really tailor their experience so that the student has dedicated time to complete the coursework. It's coursework that's relevant to their career, and they're only having to do the number of hours they need.
And one of the things that we've talked about is the work experience integrates into the academic experience. So it's not a typical 30 hours of academic credit that you would get in your undergrad, right?
Yeah, I would emphasize that this is, it is traditional coursework. They are getting accredited courses on a transcript. That's what's required for CPA licensure, but we are looking to integrate that experiential learning component so that what they're doing at work matches what they're learning in the courses, which we've heard, really, really helps them as they move along in their firm experience.
That's great. One of the questions I get frequently is, how long do we anticipate that it would take a student, let's say they need 30 credit hours. They didn't come out of undergrad with more than 120. How long would we expect that it would take them to get to the 150 through this program?
We anticipate it will take 1 to 2 years.
And that's going to depend on how much time they have to study, what their course load's going to be, and how the firm is going to work with them on that.
Exactly.
Right? Okay. So I like the next slide because it's just a quick visual of what the program looks like. So just, we don't have to go through that one, but you've got it in your slides, and it'll just give you a little bit of a visual if that's helpful for you. Let's talk about the key stakeholders in the pilot program and where we are. So you've got universities, you've got the employees that we anticipate will be enrolling in the program in the fall, and then the firms. These are all the, really key players. So let's talk about the university.
Yeah, so for our pilot program, and as you've mentioned, this is a pilot. So we are, testing a new idea, seeing what works, what doesn't work. We plan to partner with one accredited university. That's really for simplicity and expediency's sake. They will be online courses, so students anywhere can take them. We are going to announce our pilot university soon. But then beyond the pilot, we really want to engage a larger pool of universities. So we'll be going through an RFP process where any university that wants to participate can respond. We look forward to working with them to bring them all into the program.
And we didn't really talk much yet about the menu of options that are available inside the program. Maybe touch on that for just a minute.
Yeah, so our one of our goals for this program is that eventually it will have a very large library of different kinds of courses for students to take. So depending on what kind of firm you're working at, what needs that firm has, you can really tailor the experience to really aid in your career at that firm. So it's directly relevant to you as you're working.
And you mentioned that the cost of the program is expected to be around the community college. Can you share with us what that rate would be per credit hour, roughly?
Yeah, so we're aiming for $150 per credit hour. So even if you needed all 30 credit hours, it would be under $5,000. So
very affordable then. Okay. And so let's talk about the employee component of this, the employee / undergrad / now working for the 150 hours. What's their experience going to be like?
So this would be someone who would join a firm right after graduation. Another great benefit of this program is, lots of firms don't hire until you have 150 right now. And this way you could be brought on earlier, so you wouldn't have that gap between school and employment. And we're really looking at, for the pilot, students who have completed their bachelor's degree in accounting. That means they have their core accounting and business courses that they need for CPA licensure complete, but they have not yet met the 150 hours. And then beyond the pilot, we'd be looking at, increasing the number of students, introducing some rolling admission dates, things like that.
Okay. And then firms are obviously key to the success of this pilot. So what do you anticipate their experience will be?
Yeah, so we ultimately see this as a recruitment tool for firms, that this is another great tool to put in that toolbox of ways to go out and recruit staff into the firms. So right now we're actually currently looking for firms who would be interested in participating in the pilot, but also beyond the pilot. And you'll see there's a link here if you'd like to take a survey to let us know that your firm is interested, and we'll be reaching out with more information. But the firms will work with students to tailor their learning. They'll work with students on what that flexible schedule would look like. And very importantly, provide that paid work experience to the student.
That's great. And one of the things I love about this program is there is flexibility at the student level and at the firm level, not not a lot of prescriptive guidance on how the firm and the employee will work together to earn those hours, other than it's a collaboration. So that's great. All right. Thank you, Julia. We're excited about you having the opportunity to talk about this. We'll obviously be bringing you back for updates as the pilot progresses, and we look forward to learning more about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa.
And with that, I'm going to ask Tom Hood to join the stage. Tom is our Executive Vice President of Business Engagement and Growth. He leads conversations with our members in business and industry, which is a substantial portion of the accounting profession. So he is going to be joining the town halls regularly to discuss the future of finance. And, if you're a member in business and industry, you're going to find this fascinating. If you're a member in public accounting, these are your clients. So this is going to be incredibly relevant to you as well. So thank you, Tom. I'll let you bring your guests up, and I will see you at the close.
All right, Lisa, it's great to be here, and welcome to everyone out there in the town hall. I'm going to talk a little bit about our future finance and bring up two, I think they're exemplars of what we think the future finance means. And so with that, let's turn the slide and bring up Angela Ho and Patrick Chung. So I'm going to introduce both of them. Then we're going to just cover a couple quick things about future finance, and then get into a conversation with Angela and Patrick. So Angela Ho is a CPA, CGMA, and an MBA. She's the Chief Compliance Officer at Oceans First Bank. She describes herself as a banking finance executive who makes informed and quick decisions, often with strategy for both near and long term. She's led teams of up to 30 with a focus on strategic priorities, including branch consolidations, M&A, capital markets, accurate financial reporting, while maintaining strong internal controls. You're describing that whole future of finance perfectly with your experience there, Angela. She solved for 20% efficiency gains in branch consolidation strategy. She's evolved the finance function at the bank by standing up corporate development, strategy, and FP&A, as well as identifying the right technology partners to automate processes. She transformed the finance function to a high-performing team while achieving the highest departmental employee engagement scores at the bank. She views blockchain as a technology strategy for customer acquisition, revenue growth, and cost saving. She's also a member of the AICPA Council. Everyone welcome Angela Ho to the show. Angela, say hi to everyone.
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to be here with you today.
And I'm going to introduce Patrick Chung, who's also a CPA. He's the principal accounting officer after starting as the corporate controller at Ocean First Bank in 2020. He's also a graduate of the 2022 Leadership Academy. I'm proud to say I've actually taught him as we run that program now for the 14th year. He's an active volunteer for AICPA Legacy Scholarship Program, the New Jersey CPA Scholarship Committee, the New Jersey Bankers Emerging Financial Leaders Group, and he's recognized by the New Jersey Society of CPAs as a 30 under 30 in the fall of 2015. He's a strategic partner for company-wide programs, including enterprise risk management, regulatory compliance, SOX compliance, and volunteer committees. A graduate from Rutgers with his accounting degree and a CPA, and 11 years as an auditor prior to that at KPMG. Patrick, welcome to the show.
Tom, thank you for having me. Great to be here.
So I just want to cover two more quick slides, but I like to say I stand on the shoulders of giants. We pulled this group together about a year and a half ago when we started to see all the issues coming out of the pandemic. And we started by just asking them, what are the top issues you're seeing? And after a couple of phone calls, they were all seeing the exact same issues. So then we said, would you like to get together and help us co-create what we think the future of finance and accounting is going to look like as we come through the pandemic? And sure enough, every one of them said yes. The group has actually grown a little bit, but these are some of the representative companies that we're working with. They've met 15 times over the last 2 years, once every other month. We hold a summit in December and an in-person meeting in June. So I'm going to show you what this group came up with. And I'm going to ask Angela and Patrick talk a little bit about how they see their careers emerging around this whole future of finance idea. Let's go to that next slide, please. These were the top issues that this group identified at our last summit in December. By the way, these have been moving around, but they're almost all pretty consistent. But what I want to point to is what they've said consistently. It's not like any one of these issues is big. It's that they're all happening at the same time, requiring them to really deal with all of these things. But finding and retaining talent continues to be a big one. Accelerated digital transformation, driving a need for new skills. So they're all three related. Although maintaining culture in a hybrid environment, actually, I saw started to move up in today's poll with the Florida CFO conference. Impact of inflation and recession. You just heard the economists talk a little bit about that. And then the emerging trends of DEI and ESG. Let's go to the next slide, which really paints the picture of the vision for the future of finance that our group came up with. Is on this next slide, please. And then we're going to, just for a minute. So what's your favorite phrase up there, Angela, in terms of what, these are phrases that the group actually came up with, but you can see it's this shift into that, I call it windshield view, strategic foresight. But yeah, any favorite phrase on there, Angela? She's looking at, or is she frozen? Patrick, can you hear it?
Yes, I can.
All right, let's have you jump in. There, Angela looks like she's back.
Sorry, I must have lost connection. You asked me what my favorite phrase was.
Yes,
I love the from CF no, like NO to CF no, KNOW. But I'll let Patrick answer what his favorite is as well.
Yeah, a lot of favorites up here, but value focus probably resonates very, very strongly with me, along with the windshield view.
Yeah, the shift.
Yeah, those two.
Cost to windshield, yeah, cost to value, and rear view mirror to windshield view. Yeah, I think CFNO tends to be the one that everyone like really resonates with. Let's take those down so I can talk to Angela and Patrick with all of you out there. So I want to start with you, Angela, because so as you look at the future of finance, you've been involved in a couple meetings and panels. Obviously, you're on council, so you've seen a bunch of this. How has this impacted your career journey? And let's talk about your most recent shift to the chief compliance officer, right, from a more CFO type role. Let's talk about that, and then we'll have Patrick chime in, and because you're both related at the same company in a way, how you're moving up.
I'd say that I am, even though I've transitioned out of accounting and finance, I still am really passionate about the accounting and finance field, really focused on talent pipeline, which was really one of the considerations I had in mind when I decided to leave the team. We had pipeline, we had Patrick, and we were really fortunate to be able to make pathways for some of our more junior folks to step up and take a leadership role, and allow me to step into something a bit different. I'd say that the technical skills, we cannot lose sight of how important those are. Even if ChatGPT exists, the human element and the ability for us to translate those technical, whether the technical language, whether it's in debits and credits, or if it's in laws, rules, and regulations in the banking sector, people just prefer that face-to-face interaction. And so I'd say don't lose, for those of you who are in BNI, thanks so much for tuning in today. I know it's a smaller percentage than our public accounting folks, but don't lose sight of that human touch, and don't lose sight of your technical expertise.
Yeah, and it's our foundation, right? That's where our trust foundation comes from. So and you helped mentor Patrick. So Patrick, talk about your career journey and how it's shifted, and if any of that future finance applies to what you've noticed in your career path so far.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. As you mentioned, I spent 11 years in a public accounting firm. I was primarily focused in audit. I chose to kind of make a shift into the private sector back right in the middle of the pandemic in 2020. So interesting time to make some career moves. But, I kind of had this mold and this view that has grown over those 11 years in public accounting, and then stepping into a controllership role. As one can imagine, a lot of what I had to do was on data accuracy, historical information, analyzing processes and procedures. So a lot of good tangible things, but I want to emphasize a lot of that had to do with historical, right? So when you do an audit, it's as of 12/31, you have up until March, April, February, depending on what type of client you have and different year ends, and you're always looking backwards in time. So 12 years of that kind of constant training of historical processes, procedures, really was ingrained in me. But I think working with Angela and kind of seeing how she operated, because I think she has the epitome of kind of a windshield view. She's always thinking strategically. She's always thinking about what's next. And just kind of getting bits and pieces from her along the way has really helped shape me, and been able to, as a result, I've been able to kind of take on this principal accounting officer role and kind of hopefully fill into her shoes. And it really boils down to, we're really good as accountants doing controls, compliance, all of those things that you would expect as fundamental core competencies. But what CEOs and other executives are looking for as part of that partnership and as part of that relationship is, trying to focus on different things. How are we analyzing data? How are we figuring out trends, identifying what could be potentially next? And so that's what's kind of helped me over the last couple of years to change that mindset, to think about what's coming down the pipeline, to really focus on less manual procedures, more automated procedures, so that can free up our team's time to analyze data, to react to different things. And I'll do one recent example just because I think it might be very tied into what was discussed earlier, is the recent banking failures. If you kind of think about what happened there, if I only focused, or if our team only focused on historical information, we wouldn't have been as prepared for our earnings release and kind of the investor presentations and the Q&A that comes along with it. So although our bank was positioned very well among that. There's always a risk of contagion. There's always a risk of new things like social media that might not have existed in the past. So our team was able to nimbly analyze data, look at different information above and beyond our normal earnings release, closing the books, reconciliations, and some of those traditional processes that you see. And I think that's really set me up very well for the role that I'm in. And a lot of that has to do with just absorbing what I could from Angela and other leaders of our organization.
And you heard the economists say that we can't use the past anymore as a good predictor because of all the stuff that's happened. And I think you're putting the exclamation mark on that. Just a final comment, Angela, in terms of, so Chief Compliance Officer in a bank in today's environment, it couldn't have been better guest for this show. But what are you talking about the board? What's the big thing about you in terms of this future finance and why it's important relative to all of this?
As a now, aspiring compliance professional, it's still all the same themes. Actually, they translate certainly across business lines, data quality, talent pipeline. It's really all the same. And so I guess what I'd leave the audience with is, you may have your mindset on the road to CFO, but sometimes you may take a quick pivot, and there's, you can always turn around and come back. So I'll leave you with that.
Awesome. Patrick, Angela, thank you so much for being on here with us in today's Power Hour. And I think we're coming back to you, Eric.
Thanks very much, AICPA, for having us.
Yeah, Tom, Patrick, and Angela, that was a great session. So thank you. Look forward to having you back on future town halls, Tom. So Lisa and I are going to bring this session, the 99th session, Lisa, here to a close. It was a power session, so we're going to take these questions and leverage all the questions for our newsletter, the town hall newsletter that will come out early next week. And we always take the top questions and try to give the best answers possible. So we've got a couple of final updates here. Lisa, I'll let you cover this one.
Thank you, Eric. On the last town hall, we talked about with Dan Hood the results of the Accounting Today's Top 100 results. And now we're asking, hey, give us some data so that we can give you information on what the trends are in the firms below that top 100. So this is the PCPS benchmarking survey. We had about 1,000 firms participate last time. We'd love to beat that record and get even more. It's an amazing platform. I'd really encourage you to look for the email from pcps@aicpa.org if you've participated in the past. And if you haven't, please join us and provide some streamlined economic data so that we can report back to you on what the trends are looking like amongst your peer group.
Yeah, I'd just like to echo those comments, Lisa. I mean, this is benchmark data, information to help you better run your practice is so important. And this survey really brings a lot of information to light. So it's a great service of PCPS. So here's another resource. We talked a lot about where rates are going and financing today with the opening session. We have a program here where we're helping firms that want to support their clients with some of these financial advisory discussions. We've got a white paper here on moving into doing more in that area. This is really just about optionality for some of your clients. This is leveraging fintech and some other opportunities out there that your clients can take advantage of to help them with their lending needs. And there's 7A, SBA 7A programs that are being introduced here. So here's a way to learn more about that. So here's in summary of what we covered today. And Lisa, I can't wait to be with you at Engage. So we'll be coming to you live from Engage. It's a different day, Lisa, right? It's June 6th.
Join us on Tuesday instead of Thursday. But we're excited about our 100th episode.
Yeah, so it somewhat happened naturally here. It's nice to be together. If you're at Engage, you can come and watch us live in person, or we hope many of you watch as you've been watching. We have well over 7,000 attending today. And what we're going to do for the 100th edition is make it available for colleagues at your firm or company. So we're going to send out a link, or there's a link right here that they can register. So we're opening this up to a broader audience than just the AICPA membership. So here's the next two episodes, June 6th, Tuesday, 3 p.m., and then June 22nd. So thanks for being with us today. Lisa, always great to be with you.
Thank you. See you guys next time on Tuesday.
Thank you for your participation. You can now subscribe to the AICPA Town Hall series on your favorite podcast platform, as well as watch archives on YouTube and AICPA TV. Tune in for live broadcasts Thursdays at 3 p.m. Eastern Time.